All right, so today we're diving into a story that's really a blend of international finance and those global power plays everyone's always talking about.
Yeah.
It's about a secret deal hidden for over 40 years
Wow.
that reveals just how intertwined the U.S. and Saudi Arabia really are.
Oh, absolutely. There's so much to unpack here. It's
Right.
really a fascinating look at how economic ties can shape these geopolitical relationships.
Exactly. So rewind with me to 1974.
Okay.
The world is in the grip of a massive oil crisis.
Right.
The Arab nations of OPEC are retaliating against U.S. support for Israel during the Yom Kippur War.
Mm-hmm.
They launch an oil embargo that sends shockwaves through the global economy.
Yeah, and the U.S. was hit hard by that.
Oh, yeah.
Soaring inflation, a crashing stock market. It was a real test.
A real test for the American economy, for sure.
Sure.
It was a critical moment.
Yeah.
And enter William Simon,
Okay.
a former Wall Street bond trader who was then the U.S. Treasury Secretary. And his task, convince Saudi Arabia, flush with petrodollars from the skyrocketing oil prices, to invest their newfound wealth in U.S. debt.
Wow, that's a pretty big ask.
High-stakes mission.
High-stakes mission for sure.
Failure could have tipped the balance of power in the Middle East,
Oh, yeah.
potentially giving the Soviet Union a significant advantage.
Huge.
The stakes were incredibly high. The future of the U.S. economy, its global standing,
Mm-hmm.
even the stability of the Middle East were all riding on Simon's ability to strike a deal.
And he did it.
He pulled it off.
He pulled it off, but it came with a pretty significant caveat.
A secret clause
Yeah.
that would remain hidden for decades.
Wow.
King Faisal of Saudi Arabia insisted that their purchases of U.S. debt be kept completely confidential.
Mm.
And for over 40 years, the U.S. honored that request.
That's incredible. It makes you wonder why King Faisal would demand such secrecy.
Right.
I mean, was he concerned about a backlash from other Arab nations?
Yeah.
Or worried about becoming too entangled with the U.S.?
Or maybe he saw this financial leverage as a powerful tool
Oh, yeah.
to be wielded strategically when and if the need arose.
Definitely a possibility. So the agreement itself is essentially like a quid pro quo.
Okay.
The U.S. would continue buying oil from Saudi Arabia, provide them with military support and equipment,
Mm-hmm.
and in return, the Saudis would use their petrodollars to buy up U.S. Treasury bonds. Essentially, they were helping to finance America's spending.
Sounds simple enough, but how did they actually manage to keep these massive transactions under wraps for so long?
Well, it took some financial maneuvering.
Okay.
The U.S. Treasury came up with a system of add-ons.
Add-ons.
Yeah, special arrangements that allowed Saudi Arabia to buy treasuries outside the normal competitive bidding process.
Mm.
This kept their purchases off the public record, and they also grouped Saudi Arabia's holdings with those of other oil exporters.
Oh, clever.
Yeah, further masking the true scale of their investment.
You also have a pretty elaborate system to maintain that secrecy. But as with any secret, it eventually came to light.
It did. In response to a Freedom of Information Act request by Bloomberg News a few years back,
Oh, wow.
the U.S. Treasury finally revealed the extent of Saudi Arabia's holdings.
Mm.
The number was staggering.
Oh, was it?
$117 billion.
Whoa, that's a huge amount of money. But some experts believe that this official figure may be just the tip of the iceberg.
Yeah, there's speculation that the Saudis might be using offshore financial centers and shell companies
Oh, to hide even more.
to further disguise their investments. So the true amount could be significantly higher,
Like, how much higher are we talking?
potentially even double the disclosed figure.
Which begs the question, why go to such lengths to keep it all secret?
Right.
And what does this hidden financial relationship mean for both countries, especially in a world where oil prices are fluctuating and geopolitical alliances are shifting?
Yeah, those are the key questions we need to explore.
Okay.
The revelation of the secret agreement opens up a Pandora's box of concerns and possibilities.
Definitely.
Definitely a lot to think about. It's crazy to think this isn't just about some old agreement, you know?
Right.
It raises questions about what's happening between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia right now.
Yeah. And what could happen in the future?
Exactly. Like, could they actually use this huge stake in U.S. debt as leverage?
That's the big question, isn't it? Could the Saudis use their U.S. treasuries as, like, a bargaining chip?
It's possible. Yeah.
Like they did with oil back in the 70s.
Yeah, and we've already seen signs of that happening.
Oh, really?
Remember that whole thing with the 9/11 bill back in 2016?
The one that would allow victims' families to sue Saudi Arabia.
That's the one. The Saudis basically said they'd dump a ton of U.S. treasuries if it passed.
Wow. So they were willing to create chaos.
Yeah, it was a power move, for sure. And that bill did pass the Senate, by the way.
Oh, wow. I didn't realize it went that far.
It did, although it was stuck in the House at the time, according to our sources.
Makes you think about how vulnerable the U.S. could be.
Definitely. So about these U.S. treasuries as a weapon.
Yeah, how would that even work?
Well, first off, we got to know what U.S. treasuries are.
Okay.
They're basically like IOUs from the U.S. government. They use them to finance spending.
Okay.
And they're seen as super safe investments. That's why countries like Saudi Arabia have so many.
I see.
But if a big player like Saudi Arabia suddenly sells a ton of them,
What happens?
it could cause a chain reaction, you know?
So it's not just about them losing money.
No, it's way bigger than that. They could mess up the whole U.S. debt market.
Wow.
Think of it like this. Imagine an auction, right? If you flood the market with something, the price is going to drop.
Makes sense.
Same with U.S. treasuries. If there's a mass sell-off, interest rates go up, borrowing money gets more expensive for the U.S.
And that affects the whole economy.
Exactly. It could slow down growth, maybe even cause a recession.
Wow.
And the U.S. dollar could weaken, imports get pricier, maybe even more inflation.
It's insane that a deal from the 70s could still have so much power.
It just shows how connected everything is, global finance and geopolitics all tied together.
And how risky it can be to rely on each other financially.
For sure.
It's kind of ironic that something meant to create stability
Right.
could actually be a weakness for the U.S.
It's a real concern. And then there's the whole U.S. Saudi relationship, which is changing too.
How so?
Well, the U.S. is trying to make a nuclear deal with Iran, plus there's the U.S. shale boom.
So they need Saudi oil less now.
Exactly. And that makes the Saudis nervous. They're not calling all the shots anymore.
So all this gives them even more reason to use their leverage.
Yeah, especially with all that U.S. debt they hold. It's a tricky situation, and the stakes are super high.
Okay, so what does this mean for, like, the average person?
I think the big lesson here is that money has a huge impact on international relations.
Okay.
This whole U.S. Saudi deal is a perfect example. Money can be a weapon, a way to influence things, and it can bring stability or make things unstable.
It's not just about military power anymore.
Right. We have to look at financial relationships, too. They might be even more important.
It's like a whole other level of global power plays.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And those relationships can have huge consequences, sometimes in ways we don't even expect.
It's pretty wild. You know, we started with the oil crisis back in the 70s.
Yeah.
And now we're in this world of, like, global finance and secret deals.
It really shows how economics and geopolitics are all tangled up.
Totally. And it makes you think about power in a whole new way. Like, who really has the upper hand?
Right. It's not always about armies and trees anymore.
It's about money. It's about debt.
Exactly. And this whole story with the U.S. and Saudi Arabia is like the perfect example.
So let's try to break this down for our listeners.
Okay.
Why should they care about this deal from, like, 40 years ago?
Well, first of all, it shows how important history is. You know, even though the stuff we're looking at is from 2016,
Right.
you got to understand the past to really get what's going on between the U.S. and Saudi Arabia today.
So, like, what happened back then is still affecting things now.
Totally.
Wow.
And even bigger than that, this whole thing shows how much power countries have just from holding debt.
Yeah, we usually talk about military stuff or alliances.
Right, but this shows that a country's finances can be just as powerful, maybe even more.
It's like
What?
like a financial sword hanging over everyone's head.
Uh-huh. Yeah, that's a good way to put it.
And like we said, that power can be used in a lot of different ways.
To keep things stable, to put pressure on other countries, even as a weapon.
So the game of global power is way more complicated now.
It is, and money is a huge part of it.
Absolutely.
Mhm.
So for everyone listening, this should make you think, like, really think about the role of money and debt in the world.
Yeah, does it make things more stable or less? Is it even ethical? And how do we deal with these financial relationships so everyone benefits?
Those are tough questions.
They are. There's no easy answer.
But at least now we understand more about what's going on.
Right. The more we know, the better we can be involved in these important conversations.
Exactly. Well, thanks for joining us on this deep dive.
Thanks for having me.
It's been a wild ride for sure.
Uh-huh.
And until next time, keep exploring. Keep asking those tough questions.
Yeah, keep learning.
And we'll see you on the next deep dive.